waking up.
Ready for some more heresy Pharisee?
Should have had some coffee, but then I'll never sleep. So,
True. Well, happy Yom Teruah to everyone, aka Rosh Hashanah.
yes. Happy New Year.
So I feel like I should get my
Spiritual New Year.
my uh my shofar here, especially since we're going to be talking about the seven trumpets.
Oh,
I
it's
should
almost like you planned this or
almost
something.
like I
It's crazy.
planned it. I
Nice
get
camel pants.
thanks. Yeah, I don't
He's
ever
ready.
worry about. Yeah, I'm ready for the apocalypse here. Okay, my wife won't appreciate that, but here we go.
The kids are asleep.
Okay, there we go. All
It's like
right.
me. I always think like, oh, I should like get the guitar and play the Pharisee song to start these out, but my wife would just come in and beat me.
Oh man. Well, welcome back, Dr. Nate. Fill us in on some of the things we touched on last time. I know you had like a PowerPoint that you wanted to share and
That's
kind of
right.
as a
I had
review.
to like put the thoughts to paper here.
Doc,
So let's see how I do. And I'm not even going to get into the seventh seal because I was a little confused on that. So I'll get through the first six and you can take it away. Let's try
yeah, and
this.
I don't even think in the last video we got to the seventh seal. I think we got right up to the
Okay.
sixth. And so take it away. Let's see what you got
Do you
here.
see my
I
screen?
do. Revelation seals explained. Um, yeah, that looks
How's that
great.
look?
Oh yeah, fantastic.
All right.
Love it.
So we got some of our horsies here, and
Where's the pale
you know
horse? I'm just kidding.
it did its best. I tried to generate an image like 50 times.
Yeah, I know.
I got nothing.
I know the feeling. That's pretty good. That came out pretty good.
So here's the chart that Daniel gave us last time. Just your cheat sheet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of the first seal, kind of like the Persian Empire. It's like a time of peace. It even mirrors like the horses in Zechariah. We kind of see some of the same horses, not the exact same four, but they're like going out. And they're like, and there's just peace throughout the land, and that's kind of what this first seal's about. And just like what you said about the seals kind of helped me too, because I always thought like, what are these seals? These like locks or whatever. It's like these scrolls, like clay seals on a scroll, and only Jesus was allowed to have access to these. So he was able to read what's going to take place. Correct,
Right.
essentially. That one actually looked kind of better,
Ooh, that's beautiful.
kind of better. But
Yes.
there's too many horses, and like, why we got three?
Do the horses have
What's up with these seals? What is AI doing?
That's great.
All right,
I'm
so
checking the horses to see if they have five fingers or, anything
yeah,
wacky.
they got some weird. Yeah. Where are their thighs? What the heck? All right,
Yeah.
continue on. Just see, you can't be a good artist sometimes.
Mm.
All right, so that's what we said. The first seal, we got the white horse and the rider. And, it's showing victory. And he's brought kind of peace to the land. And we talked about last time how that's not necessarily a good thing for Israel, just like in the story of Esther and Persia. Like bad things were happening, but it was good overall for all these horses are referring to Rome
Mm.
and what's happening with Rome. So don't really think about like God's people necessarily what's happening with them, but for
R-
the four horses,
Right. It's describing
just what's happening to Rome.
the known empire, the world at the time, which was ruled by Rome.
So you mentioned these five good emperors, in quotations, the end good. Um, things not going so bad, and they're not murderizing Christians as much. And these next three horses, I kind of like think of them as just like a chain reaction off each other. So we got the red horse, which is civil war in Rome. You mentioned like the gladiator story, essentially with Commodus being assassinated. So I keep picturing that fight with Maximus, with
Yes.
maybe Narcissus,
Yes.
and then after him, it was 1 year, right, where there was five men who
Right.
fought for emperor, the barracks emperors.
Yeah, I don't even remember if it was called the Year of the Five, I think. But
Became known as the year of the five
yes.
emperors. There you go.
Hmm.
Your own notes.
Okay.
Become a cheat sheet.
Yes. Beautiful.
So yeah, they're called the barracks emperors because they just raise taxes like crazy, and then, of course that ushers in our next horse here, which is economic turmoil, and that just sets up our pale horse here, which just follows suit. They always build on each other, and you go back to that chart, it's the same. You put the same time period, so they're all kind of related to each other.
Right, lots of overlap there. I like those graphics. I might have to
Some
use
scary
those for
horses.
my
Yeah,
book or
steal
something. Yeah,
those. Yeah, I stole them. How dare
nice.
you steal what I've rightfully stolen?
That's awesome.
And then, yeah, so don't harm the oil and the wine, but everything else. And like you said, like they could still afford food, but it was getting pretty bad. And then I like what you said about this one. I didn't even really catch it last time. It was the 10 years. Is it, just because you're going off your whole idea, even with like the 1260 days being years, or the 1260, what, did I say that? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I said that correctly. So now we're talking about instead of 10 days, we're dealing with 10 years. So it kind of flows with that. So the
Right, the
303 and
10-year,
the 313.
yeah, that 10-year persecution under Diocletian. Or yeah, I'm sorry. The 10-year what was it?
Yes,
Yeah,
the Diocletian persecutions. What we're thinking.
right. Right. And then it ends with the time of peace in 313. Yep.
Unfortunate. You're like, oh, only 10 days. Wait, no, it's actually 10 years.
Right. Yeah, 10 years.
You always think about that. Like, okay, it's just 10 days. We can make it 10 days.
Right.
10 years, that's a little rough.
That's a little rough. Beautiful.
So we got that's the fifth seal. It says the martyrdom of the saints. And yeah, you mentioned that Diocletianic. Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is.
Persecution. And then the sixth seal is kind of just the breakdown in Rome continuing, where they've had their fun, they've persecuted the Christians, and now things are starting to turn against them. And that leads into our buddy Constantine. It's kind of like essentially the end of pagan Rome. I think about it like that. And it's like, oh, we can't beat him, let's join him concept.
Right.
So Constantine becomes the first Christian emperor.
Yes.
And that leads us into, yeah, that's all I had.
Awesome. That's a great recap.
How do I get done sharing here?
Oh, let's see. I think I can hit share on my. Oh,
Top, there we go.
there we go. Beautiful. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly in the last video, I think we kind of left off on that sixth seal, with the Diocletianic persecution. And so we're going to pick back up there. Let me um, let me
I
share my
forgot how to.
screen. And
Got you in a tiny window. I'm trying to figure out how to get you back.
yeah, these buttons are strange, but are you able to see my
I can see your
can you
screen. Good,
seal
yeah.
my screen? All right. So yeah, you just
I can
covered that
steal your screen.
that chart, and so we're gonna pop down here um, to yeah, so the 144,000 sealed. Let me scroll back up, and we're gonna cover some info, a little bit more on Constantine here. Boy,
There
um,
we go. Fixed it.
okay,
Active
great.
speaker view. That was the trick.
Ah, yes. So yeah, we touched on the martyrdom of the saints, um, and the 10-year persecution ended by Constantine in the Edict of Milan. So this sixth seal, the terror in Rome, um, is very interesting. So you know, this sixth seal is characterized by an earthquake, which, if we understand an earthquake, it means a major political upheaval. And so, to give you a little bit of background for this earthquake in the sixth seal, is this period between this Edict of Milan and 313 up to the death of Theodosius in 395. So what happens early in this time in 293, Diocletian had split up the empire into two divisions, Eastern and Western, and he created this rule of four. So you're going to have Diocletian in the east as the Augustus and Galerian as his Caesar. So Caesar is like the lesser, right? And Augustus is the greatest. And then in the west, you're going to have Maximian as Augustus and Constantius as Caesar. And so Diocletian limited senatorial power to only that of Rome. He eliminated checks and balances to his imperial rule, and the imperial court was moved from Rome to Asia Minor, so to that eastern division of the empire. All right, so then what happens is now you get this major political upheaval. So you got this rule of a tetrarchy. You got four dudes that are ruling this entire kingdom. Well, Constantine, so Constantius died, and remember he was the Caesar in the west, and Con- Constantine's army named Constantine Augustus. So they recognized him as higher than Maximian. They would follow him. So now there were six people claiming control of the West. So who was going to rise up amongst them? Well, after Constantine saw the the West starting to divide and uh, become weakened, he takes an army of 40,000 soldiers, crosses the Alps, and engages in what's known as the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312. So interesting. This is where we talked about this last time a little bit, where he gets this vision. So Lactantius, who was like this uh, counselor to Constantine, and then also Eusebius, the church historian, share a similar story, although it's not very consistent. So I don't know how much of it we can say is absolutely true. But they say that he had this vision of this sign that said, "In this sign, conquer," and that's where he came up with the Cairo or the conquering in the name of Christ or the cross. And so that became that Christian symbol. So he consolidated his power, and then the empire was basically split between him and Licinius in the east, and together they shared. Um, they signed that Edict of Milan, and eventually Constantine conquered Licinius and consolidated his rule over the entire empire. So now Constantine became sole Augustus, sole ruler of the entire Roman Empire. So now, interestingly, after his victory at the Milvian Bridge, the Roman Senate built an arch. So Constantine is heralded as this great Christian emperor, and even like in the what is it called, the City of God by Augustine, I think they make this time out to be like this the great start of this millennium or this kingdom, but in truth, Constantine, I do not believe was a Christian ever. Um, so let me give you some evidence as to why I think that is. Um, Number one, the Roman Senate commissioned the building of an arch of Constantine in Rome, and you can look up pictures of that. Um, and it was positioned to align with the colossal statue of Sol, the sun god. So right next to the Colosseum, you have this colossus, this giant statue of the sun god, and um, and then they build the arch of Constantine aligned to it. And on the arch are three statuettes of Sol Invictus on its reliefs. So that's the first little sign there that he was still enwrapped in paganism. Um, so this is talking about the truce there between him and Licinius, and then it was broken, and then he became sole ruler. So we looked at. We'll come back to the paganism of Constantine in just a second, and let's just touch on the sixth seal in the scriptures. And it says, "I saw the Lamb open the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake, and the sun became black like sackcloth, moon turned red, stars fell to the earth like figs." And we talked about how this resembles, the falling of a kingdom or an empire. The sky receded. I think we might even touch. Did we touch on these scriptures last time where we went into Nahum?
Yeah, you looked at
Yeah, we
these and the
we kind
cloud, the sky being rolled back like a scroll, kind of stuff.
Right. So we covered most of that, and showed how in Scripture, in the prophets, they showed that this type of language should not be understood as stars, meteors hitting the earth, but rather the upheaval of a kingdom. So what I did was add a little bit of content since we talked last time, and just to kind of demonstrate, you know, how he held on to his paganism. So what he did was he constructed the city of Constantinople, which basically means Constantine's city. And this was in Byzantium, so this is the Eastern Empire. So we know where Constantinople is, but it was also known as Nova Roma or New Rome. Funny enough, it was also built on seven hills, just like Rome was built on seven hills. All right. So it took 6 years. When he consecrated it, he moved the capital of Rome to Constantinople, and he built lots of buildings, including the Hagia Sophia, as it's now known. But basically, he created this square, and in the square, you have the Great Palace of the Emperor. Its ceremonial suite was named the Palace of Daphne, named after a Greek mythological nymph or a young virgin. So tell me what Christian emperor would create a ceremonial suite named after Daphne in his palace. All right. Then he
He's just
also
doing his best, you
he's
know.
just doing his best, right? All right. So let's continue on that narrative of him doing his best. He
Did you
erected.
mention last time that like there was like babbling and all that,
Mhm.
speaking in tongues with the Daphne?
Well, so
Was that somebody else?
him and Licinius consulted the oracle at I think it was at Delphi, and
Okay.
they decided the best course of action, um, or maybe it was prior to that, was to kill the Christians, and then, yeah, maybe getting my timeline mixed up of who did that, but um,
All right. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah. I
they,
don't think it was Constantine.
yeah, it wasn't Constantine, so they consulted this oracle, and then, anyways, um, yeah, so this was this Cybele here is one of those oracles, the Sibylline oracles that we briefly touched on, but that's something that you should just Wikipedia and read about. It's interesting. But he altered a statue of Ray Cybele in the fashion of Tyche, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So he took this statue that was already there in Constantinople and he kind of took a few things away and refashioned it and to become the Tyche of Constantinople in order to adapt the imperial cult to a Christianized regime. So this was Tyche was the matriarchal goddess of prosperity. It's interesting. There's a lot of matriarchal tones in Roman Catholicism and the worship of Mary. Now, the Forum of Constantine included a column 50 meters tall, built on the second of seven hills, on on which sat a statue of Constantine himself. I'm just changing my view here a little bit. There we go, so I can make sure. Actually, you know what? Let's go back. Uh, okay, I liked that compact view. There we go. Okay, so now, so Constantine made this column, this colossus, 50 meters tall, and then put a statue of himself on it, but in the image of Helios or Sol Invictus, the sun god or Apollo. And his statue was crowned with a seven-pointed radiate crown, similar to the Statue of Liberty. Looks kind of like that, and it pointed toward the rising sun. In his hands, he held a spear and an orb representing, I believe, uh, the sun, and it was contained a fragment of the cross. So this relic, a piece of the cross that Messiah was crucified. Now, at the foot of the column was a sanctuary which contained relics, allegedly from the crosses of the two thieves, and the baskets from the loaves and fishes miracle, an alabaster ointment jar belonging to Mary, and the Palladium of ancient Rome, so a wooden statue of Pallas, Athena from Troy. All right, so here now you have this column that he builds with the statue of himself in the form of the sun god, with all these relics from Christianity, along with a palace of Athena. All right, so you tell me if that's not syncretism. I don't know what is. All right, so now here's like a drawing of what this man looked like. You have to look at it sideways there, because this thing was just the column was 40 meters tall, very big. So it's kind of crazy to think that he was this great Christian emperor. In fact, what he did was he was a Romanist. He wanted to pacify the empire and get everybody together and just make everybody get along. So he made this new Romanist Christian religion something very acceptable and kind of mixed in his paganism with it. So he built a lot of Roman Christian churches. He looted pagan temples. Now he didn't just destroy uh, like tons and tons of pagan temples because he hated paganism, but he used the treasuries from those temples to help fund all his other
Mm.
construction projects. Very smart, right? And he erected statues of other emperors before him. Um, and here's a few images of coins of his um, with Sol Invictus on those coins. So here's one. This is from about 314 to 315. So, not extremely late in his reign. I think he died in 327. But this was after the Battle of Milvian Bridge, where he supposedly had his conversion experience, right? Where he conquered the sign of the cross. Yet he still had Sol Invictus on his coins years after that. Here's another one here from 316. Sol standing facing head left, holding victory, set on a globe at shoulder level behind, right hand raised with an open palm. This one was from earlier, from 310 to 313. And here he is with his radiate bust there of Sol. So the point is that you know he was a pagan emperor through and through, yet church historians like Eusebius painted him in a grand light as this great Christian emperor. So that makes me question all of the accounts of Eusebius. Doesn't mean none of it's true. It just means it's got a hard slant on it. You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
All right. So now the central seat of power over the entire Roman Empire moved from the Latin seat in Rome to the Byzantine seat in Constantinople. And this is where you kind of get this idea of Roman Catholicism versus Orthodox, which is more a Greek type of uh, religious system. So then in 325, he's the one who actually called for and convened a council of bishops known as the Council of Nicaea. This was in Bithynia, just a few miles from Constantinople. And so this is where Nicene Christianity was defined, and they condemned the Quartodeciman practice. The Quartodecimans were believers who wanted to celebrate the resurrection of Messiah on Passover, on Nisan or Aviv 14. And so,
Oh.
yeah, so this is where they condemned that practice. Um, just so you know, before he died here in 326, he had his own son executed, and he died in three. This might be a typo there. I think it was 327 that he died. So I'm gonna double check that. So yeah, he never. I'm gonna put that in red so I don't forget to do that. Um, there we go. So he never really, he actually never illegally ever made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. That didn't happen until several years later under Theodosius. So he did do some things at times to limit some pagan practices. Um, so yeah, those definitely continued under him. Here's something uh, after he after the Council of Nicaea, he wrote this letter to churches, and he says, um, yeah, he says, all the brethren in the East who have followed the Jewish practice will henceforth observe the custom of the Romans. This is the council determining this. And then he writes this letter and he says, uh, it appeared an unworthy thing that in celebration of this most holy feast, talking about Easter, that we should practice the practice of the Jews. We have impiously defiled their hands with enormous sins, and are therefore or that they have defiled their hands with enormous sin, and they're deservedly afflicted with blindness of soul. For we have it in our power, if we abandon their custom, to prolong the due observance of this ordinance to future ages by a truer order, which we have preserved from the day of passion until the present time. Let us then have nothing in common with the detestable Jewish crowd, for we have received from our Savior a different way, a course at once legitimate and honorable lies open to our most holy religion. Beloved brethren, let us with one consent adopt this course, and withdraw ourselves from all participation in their baseness. So this period marked a further move away from the Hebraic biblical traditions. These believers in the East, um, had already moved away from those traditions, but they still wanted to keep the Passover. They wanted to celebrate the resurrection of Christ in accordance with the biblical date of Passover, rather than solely on a Sunday as it's practiced today in churches, Easter Sunday. Right, that's where this all came from.
Just talking with somebody today about how things got pretty crazy in the church, like as far as just doing things opposite of what the Jews were doing, like even like hand washing and bathing in general,
Right,
just to be opposite them. Like, oh, we can't do those mikvahs and hand washings they do. Like, we talk about Mark 7. So it's like, why did the bubonic plague come?
right. Maybe they didn't wash their hands like they should be.
There's reasons why the Torah has simple basic instructions
Yeah.
about cleanliness.
So So to kind of sum up this period, he remained a worshiper of the sun god Sol Invictus, but he started to strip away power from the pagan imperial form of Roman government with the pantheon and all that. But he syncretized those practices in what would become the apostate Romanist Christian Empire under Theodosius in 395. So what we see is, rather than worshiping the pantheon and the gods with all their powers, we have something today where you worship saints who have certain powers, right? Oh, saint of prosperity, saint of protection, saint of this and that and the other. Uh, what's the difference, when you're praying to these saints for these things? So
Saint Joseph you bury upside down in your lawn if you want to sell your house.
what's that?
There's a saint for everything. Saint Joseph, you bury him upside down in your lawn if you want to sell your
Oh,
house.
really? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
When
crazy.
I worked at my parents' bookstore, they would sell some of the Catholic stuff, and
Uh-huh.
we like kept those in the back, in case anyone requested them. So it was,
Oh
looking
man,
back, it's like, why do we carry any of that stuff? But
yeah,
at the time, I was like, if they come in, they're at least getting
yeah. Well, we don't
exposure to.
we don't know what we don't know until we know it, right? And so we're all learning and growing. But
I know
Constantine
nothing.
also helped establish a bond between church and state that would begin to grow teeth, right, by the time of Justinian in 538. So, at this time it was like the culture shift, but not the legal framework to enforce laws under penalty of the state necessarily. So, but he was creating that, he was building up to that. And this transfer of power would eventually become Papal Rome, which ushered in this great apostasy that we see in 2 Thessalonians 2:3. All right, but now before this evolution fully occurred, we're going to see these trumpets being poured out. Now, before the trumpets are poured out, and if you think about these seven trumpets, what did the Israelites do for when they went to Jericho to destroy Jericho? They marched around for 7 days and blew their trumpets and yelled on the final day, marching around it 7 times until it fell. So the same thing with these trumpets are marking the judgment being poured out upon this empire. We've seen it. The seals show the evolution of the Roman Empire to become what it is, and then we're going to see the trumpets start to bring uh, some upheaval and judgment upon the empire. But before those trumpets would be sounded, you're going to seal the 144,000. So rather than spending a lot of time on that, let me just say that the 144,000 refers to all the believers. All of Israel shall be saved. So, 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe. It's all symbolic of
Military number.
completion.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a completion. Um, so if we can get to the juicy stuff, and we can talk about how Caleb was a Kenizzite and he joined Israel by faith and became the head of the tribe of Judah. Gentiles are grafted in to Israel through Yeshua, and we're no longer foreigners. And Gentile just means a foreigner. So we're no longer Gentiles. We grew up Gentiles of the nations or foreigners. When we come into covenant, we are Israel. So we're part of that 144,000, so to say. So God was saying, before I pour out these judgments, I'm going to seal you. Those who have my mark on their forehead, and those who take the image and mark of this beast, this empire system. So now we'll get to the trumpets. So when the Lamb, this is Revelation 8, 1 and 2. When the Lamb opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and they were given seven trumpets. So this may mean that there's a short reprieve of time before this last seal of political upheaval and a time of peace generally until the trumpets are begin to pour out, and the seventh seal is an introduction to all of the seven trumpets. So if you look at the seven seals, when you get to the seventh one, you open the seventh one, it's like, oh, now you're going to have seven trumpets. And by the way, when you get to the seventh trumpet, the same thing happens. It says, oh, now we're going to have seven bowls poured out. So really, the seventh seal, we are in the seventh seal in the sense that the seventh seal encompasses all the time between that point until the second coming of Messiah or the greater apocalypse. So we can't just limit the seventh seal to a short time period. The seventh seal literally opens up into the seven trumpets, which span a huge amount of time, which then open up into the seven bowls, which span a huge amount of time. Make sense? It's progressive.
Here's mud.
All right. So we have this
We're,
silence in
we're still
heaven.
in the seventh seal right now, is what you're saying.
We're in the seventh
Here
seal.
in 2024.
We're in the seventh seal, and we're in the seventh trumpet, and we're in the sixth bowl, about to open the seventh or pour out the seventh bowl, I believe. So we're right there at the precipice. So we got to work through these to kind of prove this out. Now, if there's silence in heaven, it means what happens in heaven is what is going to happen on the earth. So nothing's going to be poured out on the earth yet. It's just like, Job kind of talks about, can you bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades? Now, this doesn't mean that the stars do stuff to us, but it's saying that what happens in the heavens affects what happens in the earth. So we're going to skip over some of that. That's for reading if somebody's interested in reading this when the book comes out. Um, but we'll get back to the history here.
I
So
guess you can't just read the whole thing to us.
exactly. I mean, that would be kind of boring. I'd
You
probably.
gotta leave
I
something.
mean, you're already yawning. I'm going to just put you right to sleep here. So,
Told you I was tired.
but
I'm
this.
I'm awake.
All right. So
I
the
don't have a sinus headache this time, so it's
awesome.
much better than last time.
Nice. Oh man, I didn't know that. Sorry. But this time of peace would end when the barbarians attack attack the empire. And they were gathering to the north like a violent hailstorm awaiting its release. So this Emperor Theodosius, from 379 to 395, he was the last emperor to rule until the empire was permanently split between Eastern and Western. Um, so in his early career, he ruled the East while Gratian ruled the West, and he was a staunch advocate of Nicene Christianity. And in 380, along with Emperor Gratian, he issued the Edict of Thessalonica, which that is what made Nicene Christianity the official state religion of the empire, and it condemned any other Christian creeds like Arianism or any other thing like the Nazarenes, the Ebionites, the I forget all the names of them, but yeah. So and then shortly after that, you have the First Council of Constantinople, and that built upon the earlier Nicene Creed, which established the Trinity doctrine. Now, I'm not neither pro nor anti Trinity. I believe in Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but that's not really the point of this. The point was is that they would no longer allow for technical theological differences. Now, if you didn't agree with their exact definitions, you're you're legally a heretic. So now you could be punished by law under an official Roman religion if you didn't believe and adhere to these things. You see, so now you're starting to get this combination of church and state starting to come in. So now this edict was incorporated into the Theodosian Law Code, and that was fully published in 438. That took all of these laws enacted from Constantine until the year 438, and it's known as the Codex Theodosianus. So if you want to look into that, it outlines all the things that they did, which I believe included like, barring heretics or Jews or different people from owning businesses or holding offices or being judges or anything like that. Lots of things that you can read about that I won't go into right now. But what happened after Theodosius is the empire was weakened. This was leading up to the weakness in the empire that would allow these barbarian raids to be effective. So he died in 395, and his two sons became rulers in the east and west, Arcadius and Honorius. Their armed forces collapsed, and the empire never regained a unified central rule. So this leads up to 395. After his death, the Goths attacked. The empire was weak, they saw their opportunity, and the trumpets start getting poured out at this point. So, yeah. So now all these prayers of the saints, the souls under the altar had risen up to God, and he said, now is the time. We're going to pour out the trumpets. We're going to blow those trumpets and
Do we have a
enact
pope
warfare.
yet? When is the first pope? We're probably getting to this, but I'm just like you were talking about all these councils, and I'm like, when do they decide like a pope is a good idea?
Right. So you're going to have what's called the Bishop of Rome, which became eventually recognized as the papacy. So now, if you ask a Catholic today, who's the first pope, they're going to
Peter.
say Peter was the first pope, although he wasn't called that at the time. So I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head right now what year the that title Pope started being used. Maybe I'll have to research that for next time. But the
But has
idea,
it happened? It hasn't happened at this point, right?
from what I understand,
What around 400?
um, no. But the it's not necessarily a solid demarcation. I think it's an evolution that kind of happens over time. And I'll look up to see maybe when they first started calling them popes officially. Um, and when
Or just a way to garner more power and control, I'm guessing.
Right. Well, actually, under Justinian is when basically Justinian said, okay, listen, Bishop of Rome, you're in charge of all of the churches. So that's what made the Bishop of Rome
You know,
head, Pope,
that
right?
temporal power,
Right. And so that would have
temporal
been
power that they were given.
533 to 538. That time frame is when that happened. So we're we may touch on that. And there were several instances where the papacy's power continued to grow and grow. So you have under Justinian, then you're going to have under Emperor Phocas and Gregory the Great, and then you're going to get to Charlemagne, and these times where the Pope's power is reinforced. So, and given more and more power. So, but before we get too far ahead, let's open up to these trumpets. And the first thing that we want to establish is that these trumpets are affecting the world at the time, which we know is the Roman Empire. Because remember, this word for earth is gi, which can mean earth, land, region, country, or inhabitants of a region. And we remember in Daniel too, these these kings were said to have reigned over the whole earth. So again, we know that the king of Babylon didn't reign over the globe, he reigned over Babylon, which was the world dominating empire at that time, which also controlled the covenantally promised land of Israel, the Holy Land. All right. So now, if we realize that this right here, this chart, can you see that okay?
Yes.
This chart constitutes the greatest territorial extent of the Roman Empire in 116. So, if you were to look at how big did the Roman Empire grow to at its greatest extent, then this is what you're going to look at. And if you were to say, well, if these trumpets, some of them only affect like, a third of the earth or the seas, then if you divide the empire into thirds, you can kind of see these thirds right here. You've got the western third, the eastern third, and then the southern third, which is really this North Africa and Egypt and the Holy Land here. So now that we can see that context, we have a little bit more context to understand where these trumpets and where they go and what they will affect. And this is just for reference of these barbarian routes that we can refer back to here soon of when these barbarians attacked, which way they came from. And you can see, like the Goths here, they pretty much all came from the north, and then they're made their way into different areas. So we're gonna break those down here shortly. All right. So let's skip past this. We can come back to it if we need to. And we're going to break these down one by one. And here's your quick chart of the seven trumpets. So um, let me just lay these out. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you, and then maybe we'll tell you what I told you. So, yeah. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you here. And here's the seven trumpets. And no way we'll get through all these tonight because there's a lot of detail. So I want
Sounds
to
like a
give you
lot of history here.
tons of history. I mean, yeah.
I do see Attila the Hun on the bracket.
Yes, yes. Number three here. Maybe we'll get to him.
Break out my Age of Empires 2 handbook.
I could see you now. The next 6 weeks, you're gonna play the Goths, and you're gonna play the Vandals, and you're gonna play the Huns. um,
I did my reading, Daniel. I'm prepared.
that's awesome. All right, so let's break these down. Um, one thing to note is the first four trumpets are all linked, and after the first four trumpets is when you see another distinction here of the three woes. The fifth trumpet being the first, the sixth trumpet being the second, and the seventh trumpet being the third woe, right? So these four are related, and when you get to the bowls, you'll see the first four bowls are related, and the way they describe what happens in the bowls is very similar to what happens in the trumpets. So let's break these down. So now we have the scripture here, Revelation 8:7 says, "The first angel sounded his trumpet, and hail and fire mixed with blood were hurled down upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, along with a third of the trees and all the green grass." So now when we hear third, we need to be thinking, all right, a third of the empire is affected by this trumpet. Okay. And we got to think about, what does hail and fire with blood mean? The trees, grass, all being burned up. What does that mean? So we're going to break that down and go back to the prophets as well. The late fourth century with Theodosius gone, the empire was weak. The Visigoths, led by Alaric I, began their attack on the empire from their homelands in the north through Macedonia and Thrace, then assaulting Constantinople, and then working their way to Rome and eventually Gaul and Spain. So let's break this down. This is the big thing that happened was in August of 410, Alaric took these armies, these Gothic armies, and marched on Rome with 40,000 troops. He had Goths, Vandals, Alans, and Hun warriors. Some of these were conscripted. Um, they, yeah, and they were all trying to push into the empire. So at midnight, the Salarian gate was silently opened, and the Romans were awakened by what? Gothic trumpets, ironically, and then they proceeded to sack and pillage the city. So this is the first time in 800 years that Rome had fallen to foreign invaders. This is a huge landmark to set this off, leading up to the complete destruction and fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Western third of the empire. So if this warfare is described as hail, fire, and blood, let's figure out what this means in prophetic language. And we go to Job and you see, have you entered the storehouses of snow, or observed the storehouses of hail, which I hold in reserve for times of trouble, for the day of war and battle? So now we see that hail is a colloquialism for war and battle. And here we have it again in Isaiah 28 2. The Lord has one who is strong and mighty, like a hailstorm or destructive tempest, like a driving rain or flooding downpour. He will smash that crown to the ground. So now here you have a hailstorm also being likened unto military war battle. And you also see here a flooding downpour, so a flood. So if you remember, we also see the imagery of the flood. So Satan tried to kill the woman and her seed with a flood, but the earth opened up. So again, the flood doesn't mean a literal flood of rain and water. It means he tried to kill through military pursuit, through warfare, right? So the dragon made war against the saints. That's what that flood is referring to. All right, so we just have to go back to what the prophets say to understand the language. So now we also see this when Yahweh carried out punishment on Assyria when Nineveh, the capital, was destroyed in 608. And what does he say? Striking in angry wrath with a flame of consuming fire. All right, so now we have the fire that we talked about. cloudburst, storm, and hailstones, for
Mm.
Assyria will be shattered. Now, no one thinks that in 608 BC there were fire and hailstorm that destroyed the Assyrians, right? So it was warfare, it was battle. This also was prophesied about Assyria's judgment by Ezekiel.
Could the
So,
hailstones be like siege craft and
yeah.
stones being flung,
Although
ricochets? Well,
I don't think it has to be that literal or that, representative, but it would fit for sure. Yeah, fire and siege works. Um, and so Assyria said, I'm sorry,
sounds like a
Ezekiel,
Sabaton song.
yes,
Storm, clouds, fire, and steel, death from up.
fire and brimstone,
But yeah,
death
it's all
from
imagery,
below.
which is interesting. Yeah,
The
even how they're
forces of
describing
Alaric
war.
gathered on the north.
I'm sure they got an Alaric or whatever you say. I just
Yeah.
have to look it up.
So, foreigners, the most ruthless of the nations, cut it down and left it. Its branches have fallen on the mountains, and in every valley its boughs lay broken in all the earth's ravines. All the peoples of the earth left its shade and abandoned it. So now he's likening it to cutting down trees. So now we have fire, hailstone, trees, and finally we're going to have grass. Isaiah 40, 6 through 8. All flesh is like grass, and its glory like the flowers of the field. The grass withers, and the flowers fall when the breath of the Lord blows on them. And remember, God held back the winds of the four angels before he allowed them to release and let these trumpets blow. And this shofar is a wind instrument. So when God blows through this wind instrument, his wrath is poured out. So, but the word of our God stands forever. So now we have, if we go back, we're going to see, I'm going to just go back to this verse. The first angel blew through his trumpet, hail and fire mixed with blood were hurled down upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned, along with a third of the trees and all the green grass. So now we don't have to look, we don't have to think, oh, we should be expecting one day that there'll be hailstones and fire that burn up a third of the globe, literally. No, we understand it's prophetic language. God's pouring out on this fourth beast kingdom, just like he poured out on these beast kingdoms of old.
I remember the futurists in me would look at like the Ring of Fire, like all these volcanoes are gonna have to go off to burn up the world. It's like everyone's like trying to conjecture their way through like how are we gonna get that much fire?
Well, yeah, and then when we get to the bowls, we got to come up with another ring of fire, or some other catastrophe. How many catastrophic global events can the world endure at that level of thinking? Uh, so
Yeah, at that level of thinking it makes sense. Like because I'm like, oh yeah, that's why we need a millennium just to fix all the problems. It took a
right,
1,000 years, just the utter destruction.
true to that. Yeah. So now that was the first trumpet, which we could break down as the Goths invading the land warfare. So we'll go back up here and let's just touch on that. So we're going to look at the Visigoths here. This red line. Man, this is tough to follow, but you can see them coming right through here, going through Thrace and Macedonia and hitting all the way to Rome here and working their way out to Gaul and Spain, right? So that was the
It's
course
a
of,
heck
of
of a
these Goths.
trip.
That is a heck of a trip. So what are they doing? They're going across the land of one third of the empire,
Oh,
right?
look at you.
Look at that. Okay, so now let's move on to our next one, which you're going to see is the Vandals, this green line. So where did the Vandals come from? The north. They went all the way down through here, all the way down through the north coast of Africa, and established their naval base in Carthage, from which they engaged in their naval warfare. So what would we expect to see then? So let's go down to the second trumpet. Vandals under Genseric, who's known as the Tyrant of the Seas. Revelation
Mm.
8, 8, and 9. So we're going to go down here. The second angel sounded his trumpet. Something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned to blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Need I say more? All right. So a mountain can represent a nation. He used this language when he judged Babylon. I'm against you, O destroying mountain, you who devastate the whole earth, declares the Lord. I'll stretch out my hand against you, roll you over the cliffs, and turn you into a charred mountain. So, again, charred mountain, a great mountain burning with fire thrown
Okay,
into
now.
the sea. Same language. Cool stuff, isn't it? So, it's focused on the sea and refers to the exploits of the Vandals and their dominance of the Mediterranean Sea. So, the burning mountain may refer to the Roman navy because this was a crippling blow to the Roman navy. What they did is they actually floated combustible ships into the Roman fleets in the middle of the night, and they blew them all
Mm.
up. So it literally was this charred mountain thrown into the sea. It's pretty cool. Um,
I do remember the demo ships in Age of Empires being quite effective.
oh man, gosh, I guess I gotta learn how to play that game.
It's
I'm always stuck
missing
on
out
like
on all the
trying
history.
to cut logs, and then by the time I've cut a few logs down, I'm being raided by war elephants. But all right, so uh, the Vandals were the second group of Germanic peoples labeled as barbarians. So these were all these Germanic tribes. And they invaded Rome. They crossed in 405. They crossed the Rhine River, which is frozen. Like we talked about, they made through Gaul, through Iberia, and then by 429 they crossed into North Africa and established their capital at Carthage, and they launched their naval campaigns. So he built great fleets, Genseric, and he captured trading vessels all over the Mediterranean, plundered towns all along the coast, and was a terror to the Mediterranean cities. In 455, they sailed to Rome, and they burnt or sank nearly all of the Roman ships. They captured and sacked the city, destroyed temples, works of art, took lots of gold and
Dang.
silver. They vandalized it, you could say.
Uh-huh.
Ah,
Uh-huh.
uh, so
That's it. I'm going to bed.
no, no pun very much intended there. They punished them. So
Is that even where the word comes from? Like
yeah,
vandal
hmm
does
yeah,
to be a vandal.
yeah.
No
So
puns.
as far as I
Just
understand,
actual.
yeah, they were punishing them pretty badly. So
Now I know something.
all right. So they ravaged the Mediterranean coast from Asia Minor to Spain. Um, Now, Emperor Leo of the Eastern Division of the Empire, he tried to stop them, and he sent Commander Basilicus with 1,000 ships. So what happened was they started these truce negotiations, but Genseric, being this smart guy, he set out in the night with ships full of flammable materials, set fire to them, and floated them into the Roman fleet, devastating their naval forces. So here's a cool description of the battle by Edward Gibbon and the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. How about, can you read it in your cool voice?
What is my cool voice?
I don't know. The Nate voice.
In the obscurity of the night, these destructive vessels were impelled against the unguarded and unsuspecting fleet of the Romans, who were awakened by the sense of their instant danger. Their close and crowded order assisted the progress of the fire, which communicated with rapid and irresistible violence. Irresistible violence. And the noise of the wind, the crackling of the flames, the dissonant cries of the soldiers and mariners who could neither command nor obey, increased the horror of that nocturnal tumult. Did you write this?
I wish.
Whilst they labored to extricate themselves from the fire ships and to save at least part of the navy, the galley of Genseric assaulted them with temperate and disciplined valor, and many of the Romans who escaped the fury of the flames were destroyed or taken by the victorious Vandals. Genseric again became the tyrant of the seas. The coasts of Italy, Greece, and Asia were again exposed to his revenge and avarice. Tripoli and Sardinia returned to his obedience. He added Sicily to the number of his provinces, and before he died, Before he died, in the fullness of years and glory, he beheld the final extinction of the empire of the West.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I kind of wish we still spoke that way. Or like I think about the language. I wish I could write like this, you know?
It's good words, man.
It
Some
is
words I didn't know.
irresistible violence.
I need to
Um,
read this history. This is cool.
it,
Genseric. I feel like that name sounds so familiar.
mhm. So he lived to see the overthrow of Rome in 476. In his fullness of years and glory, he beheld the final extinction of the empire of the West, although not at his hands. But so he
Why
remained.
did all these barbarians want to bring Rome down?
Well, they were
I
being
know it's like an act
pushed.
of God, of course, but
Yeah. Well, yeah, act of God, angels. Yeah, ultimately that's the answer. But the secondary answer is the
I'm thinking
Huns.
in lines of like we were talking about your toes, your your toes, your 10 toes, and like the clay,
Hmm.
not the toes, but the feet of iron and clay.
Hmm.
Like, and you mentioned that maybe these Germanic people might be the clay, and that's why they didn't mix so well.
Yeah, I mean, I I haven't landed on that
Oh,
fully. We
you're
talked about,
struggling.
yeah, how it could also it could be Islam. The only the problem is how do you identify the 10 toes of this Roman beast, and then when does Islam come in? Islam isn't even created until a couple hundred years later after the fall and division of Rome into
It's a
these
Germanic pickle.
divisions. It is, and so it's difficult to ascertain. You have to know what the 10 toes are. So, but you could simply say that Rome is the iron, and whatever else that immigrates into Rome is the clay. So, which would include Germanic tribes and Islam later. You could just say that
The shotgun approach.
right. It's a
Yeah.
migration pattern of people coming into the empire. And it says that they do try to mix the seed of man, but they don't really mix well. So um, yeah, and that may be just the fact that now you have Europe with all the different nations that are divided into their separate, at times, kingdoms and nations. So um, it's hard to say with certainty at this point in my studies, but here you have this migration of these tribes, which were being pushed out of their northern lands by the Huns, by the way. So the Huns
When
were,
was Hannibal? That was like way before. I was thinking Carthage because he was from Carthage.
I don't know.
That was like
Remember,
early Roman Empire.
I'm not a historian. I just uh I just try to look at the
Like
history
even
of
when you
these.
said Constantine crossed the Alps, I'm like, wasn't that Hannibal? But I guess if you wanted to get to Italy, you had to cross the Alps. So I'm
Yeah, probably a few
sure he
people
wasn't the
crossed
first
the
one.
Alps. Yeah.
He just did it with elephants. That's why he's cool.
Ah, yes. So he remained undefeated until his death in 478. So the Vandals maintained control of the Mediterranean Sea from 439 to 534. But in 496, peace was made with Constantinople. So their Vandal kingdom extended as far east as Sicily. All right. So now this was the extent of their kingdom. So I would say that this is approximately a third of the seas, right? So it's not all of the seas that they had complete dominance over, but roughly a third, right? So
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm
even
sure they controlled so much with
right,
those, you know,
right. It's not like
those places. Every boat going through there
right. I mean, that's a
has
huge
to
amount.
check in.
Sure. So a third of the seas makes sense. All right. So now that we've conquered the second trumpet, now we'll
Like
move
that's the
on.
known world at this time. It's like
Yeah,
that's the sea sitting in the middle there.
right. And the Mediterranean Sea was the sea, the Great Sea, right? So Mediterranean basically means Middle Earth. So we're really just going back to Lord of the Rings here.
Yes.
So, all right. So now,
Forget Attila the Hun. Give me Gandalf.
Lord of the Trumpets, 7 trumpets to rule them all. All right.
On trumpets, was it a shofar or is it those silver trumpets that are blown? I was thinking about
Uh,
this the other day.
I have to look up the word
What are those
there.
silver trumpets?
I
The
think
metal
it's
trumpets.
shofars, but they're practically the same thing. Before they had silver trumpets, they used shofars, but then when they had the ability to make silver trumpets, they would use those in the temple. So
Mm.
it's just more of a technological thing, but I think the
Yeah, I guess you're not
shofar
bringing like
embodies
a
the idea better.
piece of an animal into the temple, I guess is
Yeah, nothing wrong with it, but
unclean.
yeah,
Yeah.
clean animal. Third trumpet. So now we're finally we're getting to Attila the Hun. Yes,
Dun,
this
dun.
handsome man. We'll see. All right, so Revelation 8, 10, 11, the third trumpet. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, burning like a torch, fell from heaven and landed on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter like wormwood oil, and many people died from the bitter waters. All right, so what is this going to affect, Dr. Klein?
It's clearly that ring of fire thing again, with all the
Yes,
volcanoes going off and the water's just becoming bitter in all
clearly.
the oceans of the world
Yes.
on the globe, or the flat Earth with the Santa Claus living in the North Pole.
Yes, exactly.
That one. What
So
do we
it's
call that?
we can establish it's affecting rivers and springs of water. So drinking water, transportation. So and then we also have the symbolism of a star, and we know that stars refers to kings, and
Mm-hmm.
it's depicted as a burning torch, which you could think of as a comet or a meteor in astrological terms. You have this thing coursing through the sky slowly, like this burning torch. Um,
You need like a context chart on the side here for like
yes,
star, king, or this, or
I
that. So
do. Let's put that in
connect
the
them all.
index. Wormwood
Another
is a
1,000 hours of work. Just put that in for us.
yes, I will. Wormwood is a bitter herb native to Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It can just refer to bitterness and calamity. One species of wormwood is derived specifically from the Alps. Hmm, interesting. Wonder what the Alps have anything to do with tributaries and sources of water. So, all right, now we can see this in Scripture. Okay, look at the Babylonians in 587 BCE from Jeremiah. Therefore, this is what Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, says: Behold, I will feed this people wormwood and give them poisoned water to drink. I will scatter them among the nations that neither they nor their fathers have known, and I will send a sword after them until I finish them off. All right, so uh, this is a um, just a symbolic use of warfare and like poisoned water. It's God pouring out his judgments. And doesn't necessarily mean that there's this star called wormwood that lands in rivers and poisons the rivers, right? So we're going to look at what Albert Barnes wrote. By the way, I think Albert Barnes, if you want to talk about prophets, this guy operated, I won't say he was a prophet, but this guy predicted the fall of the Roman Empire based on his understanding of Revelation. Uh, uh yeah, but fall of the Ottoman Empire
Okay.
before it happened. So he knew, based on Revelation, that the Ottoman Empire would fall, which didn't happen until uh, World War One. Okay, so he died in 1870. He and John Gill and one or two other people saw that coming. So if you want to talk about prophecy, I think prophecy and the gift of prophecy is in understanding what God has given us and declaring his word,
I'm reading the words, man.
reading
You're
the
right.
words. So
And
let's see.
how I wonder how many more too like knew exactly what you're talking about here because they were going through it,
Yeah.
like knowing that they had to survive like 10 years, like you mentioned before.
All right. Now there are dozens. There's actually, I mean, probably there's hundreds of theologians or authors or commentators who take a historicist viewpoint. Many of them are Seventh day Adventists because they embrace historicism, but they have their own take
Did
on
not
things.
know that.
They don't think as independently as like someone like Albert Barnes would, um, because they take a lot of their stuff from Ellen G. White and that sort of thing. But um, point
That
is
was a
that
question I was going to ask you. Like, it seems like a lot of scholars do take this viewpoint.
mhm.
It's just not like Timmy LaHaye popular. It's not like the Hollywood style
Well,
of
since
futurism that we see.
since from the last 150 years, it's not been popular. It's been mostly abandoned. It's not been taught. Like I was never taught this in Sunday school. Like, and probably the majority out there haven't even really thoroughly looked at historicism. So, I mean, I didn't even know who Albert Barnes was or when he lived until I started studying this. But I should. He's a great commentator. So, lived in the 19 or in the 1800s. Here's what he said about this. This is kind of leading up, so he's saying it may be assumed in this exposition that the previous symbols under the first and second trumpet blast referred respectively to Alaric and his Goths and to Genseric and his Vandals, and that the next great and decisive event in the downfall of the empire is one that is here referred to. So he's saying, well, if we established it was, Alaric and then Genseric, well, probably the next one is going to be the next major invasion force. So let's see what that would be. So he says, and then there would be some chieftain or warrior who might be compared with a blazing meteor, who, of course, would be singularly brilliant, who would appear suddenly like a blazing star, and then disappear, like a star whose light was quenched in the waters. That the
I think I know
desolating,
who you're talking.
yeah, the desolating course of that meteor would be mainly on those portions of the world that abounded with springs of water and running streams. That an effect would be produced as if those streams and fountains were made bitter, that is, that many persons would perish, and that wide desolations would be caused in the vicinity of those rivers and streams, as if a bitter and baleful star should fall into the waters, and death should spread over the lands adjacent to them and watered by them. So he gives a really good poetic, uh, you know, presupposition to how to maybe look at this next trumpet. He says whether any events occurred of which this would be the proper emblem is now the question. Among expositors there has been a considerable degree of unanimity in supposing that Attila, the king of the Huns, is here referred to, and if the preceding expositions are correct, there can be no doubt on the subject. After Alaric and Genseric, Attila occupies the next space as an important agent in the overthrow of the Roman Empire, and the only question is whether he would be properly symbolized by this baleful star. All right, so the Huns, they were
Baleful
nomads.
stuff.
Yes. They never learned to read or write, but they mastered river navigation. They mastered the mounted use of the longsword and composite bow. Here's Gibbons. The Huns were masters of the great river. Their navigation was performed in large canoes, hollowed out of the trunk of a single tree. They were masters of river warfare. They were skilled in hunting, and they mostly uh, conducted their warfare on horseback in this blitzkrieg style of attack. They would rush in, fire the barrage of arrows, and then rush out. And then, when their enemy was weakened, injured, crossing a stream or something, they would go in and lasso the enemy with these nets. And then they would capture them in the nets, or these lassos, and then drag them on their horses and then cut them to pieces with swords. Pretty brutal, but effective. So they were the ones who drove out the Goths, the Vandals, Alans, the Suevi, the Franks, Burgundians, all these Germanic tribes into the Roman lands, which led to the destabilization of the Roman Empire. So these other tribes actually feared these people and were trying to push into the Roman Empire to get away from them.
Hmm.
So this guy, Ralph Matheson, he's talking about Peter Heather's work. He says the empire wouldn't have collapsed under its own weight. There was a domino effect, and the most important effect was the Huns. Um, they uh, let's see, what did he say? Huns induced too many of these more substantial groups to cross the frontier in too short a space of time for the Roman state to be able to deal with them effectively. So they generated this new political order in Western Europe by pushing these Germanic tribes in to the empire.
Where did the Huns come from?
The
They're just always
northeast.
there. They're just Germanic, or
The Hun, let me see
I
if I
always thought
can.
they were related to the Mongols or something. But I guess the Mongols came later.
Yes, the Mongols did come in a little bit later, and they're from similar regions. Again, I'm not a historian or geographer, but northeast. So if I could pull up, if I could get back to that map here, way over in this area, and they came in, boom. I wonder if I can see. Here we go. Huns yellow. There we go. See,
So yeah, they came from somewhere
they
beyond
they came from behind.
Russia.
Yes, Khazaria.
Just similar, yeah, where the Mongols came in. So
So,
similar tactics too, it seems, with the Mongols.
right.
They would have been fighting more like the Holy Roman Empire at that point.
Yeah, my history's not that great. I have to go back and refresh. So let's stick to this. So Attila, he took control of their forces in 433. He's referred to by historians as the scourge of God, meaning a whip used for punishment. Some say he commanded an army of 500,000 men. Here's a description. Um, he was haughty in his walk, rolling his eyes hither and thither, so that the power of his proud spirit appeared in the movement of his body. He was indeed a lover of war, yet restrained in action, mighty in counsel, gracious to suppliants, and lenient to those who were once received into his protection. Short of stature, with a broad chest and a large head, his eyes were small, his beard thin and sprinkled with gray, and he had a flat nose and swarthy skin, showing evidence of his origin. So he launched this uh, Danube, the river, offensive on the Eastern Roman Empire in 441. He began his full-scale attack, capturing several Roman forts along the Danube. In 447, he invaded the Balkans. Marching west, he won the Battle of Utus, which took place along the Utus River, known as the Vit in Bulgaria. The Huns raided as far south as Thermopylae, and at this time, Attila had dominated the east, and he set his eyes on the west. Um, so there was an assumed marriage proposal from Honoria that she sent him to avoid an arranged marriage with a Roman senator, and she then took that back, but he was like, "I'm going to go claim my bride. I'm going to go to Rome, capture, conquer everything on my way, and take her." So now,
He didn't know who she was messing with.
yeah, right. So yeah, the Romans, led by Aetius, allied with the Visigothic king Theodoric I, and tried to repel the Hun army. He began his western offensive in 451, successful in Gaul, sacking, pillaging towns as he went. He took control of several Germanic tribes along the Rhine River and its tributaries. He was eventually met and pushed back at Orleans by the Roman general Aetius and Visigoth king Theodoric. He retreated to the north, where he positioned men near the Marne River, where the famous Battle of the Catalonian Fields, other known as the Battle of Callans, took place in June of 451. Interestingly enough, this time of this battle took place between the appearance and disappearance of Halley's Comet. So this comet, this comes and
Hmm.
goes. Halley's Comet from June 10th to August 15th. Well, this battle took place in June. So this was thought to have been an omen predicting the defeat of Attila. Thus, Attila was a great star falling from heaven. You have several confirmations here in history. It's kind of crazy. So the Huns were driven back to their
Just in
camp.
case you don't believe me, here's another.
Right. Here's something in the heavens for you. The Huns were driven back to their camp, where they withheld the Roman army's advance until nightfall. when both armies were said to be disoriented from the fierce and bloody conflict. This battle has been described as a monstrous, unrelenting fight, like no ancient time has ever recorded. We need to make a video series of this whole thing. It'd be pretty cool. Jourdain records that soldiers were forced to drink from rivers of blood and gore. Here's a quote from the historian Jourdain. A brook flowing between low banks through the plain was greatly increased by blood from the wounds of the slain. It was not flooded by showers, as brooks usually rise, but was swollen by a strange stream, and turned into a torrent by the increase of blood. Those whose wounds drove them to slake their parching thirst drank water mingled with gore. In their wretched plight, they were forced to drink what they thought was the blood they had poured from their own wounds. So, literally drinking gory, bitter
Contaminated
wormwood
waters.
waters.
I remember the voice actor they got. I don't know if they changed it for the new game, but in Age of Empires 2, they had like this crazy guy just reading like the narration for like I remember this the Catalonian fields. I remember this
Ah,
this level.
dude,
This, and I remember the rivers. It
they need
was
to make an Age of Empires Bible edition with narration from the book of Revelation.
Revelation edition.
Yes. So, what seemed to be a draw or a truth, both armies parted ways. The next year, in 452, the Huns invaded Italy. So now we're getting into the Alps. Okay. The Huns crossed the Julian Alps, where they besieged and conquered Aquileia, a city on the Natiso River, and what has become known as the Sack of Aquileia. They then entered the Po River basin, sacking Padua, Mantua, Vicentia, Verona, Brescia, and Bergamo, before besieging and capturing Milan. The Po River is Italy's longest river and known as the River of Italy, with over 141 tributaries. The Po Valley receives drainage from the Alps and constitutes the largest agricultural area of the country. The wormwood bitterness of Attila's ravaging made its climax in the region of the Alps, which serve as one of Europe's most important watersheds, draining the south, northwest, and east. Some of Europe's most important rivers, including the Rhine, Rhone, and Po rivers, all originate from the Alps. This is the climax of Attila's military battles. Um, Barnes continues, anyone has only to look on a map and to trace the progress of those desolations in the chief seats of his military operations to see with what propriety this symbol would be employed. In these regions, the great rivers that water Europe have their origin and are swelled by numberless streams that flow down from the Alps, and about the fountains whence these streams flow were the principal military operations of the invader. With equal propriety, he is represented in the symbol as affecting a third part of these rivers and fountains. At least a third part of the empire was invaded and desolated by him in his savage march, and the effects of his invasion were as disastrous on the empire as if a bitter star had fallen into a third of those rivers and fountains and had converted them into wormwood. Finally, he was repelled by Thorismud, king of the Visigoths. Attila returned home, and the Hun offensive came to a close. Shortly after this, Attila died in 453 after his wedding feast in a drunken stupor, choking upon his own blood. The Hun Empire was eventually defeated and extinguished, almost as if it had been a transient meteor, absorbed into the waters of the empire, raised up by Yahweh solely for the purposes of bringing about his judgments. Pretty crazy how
So
history.
everyone died in the river, drinking the blood, and then he died from his drinking his own blood or choking on his own blood.
Right, right. So,
And these, you said these rivers flow down to these other cities, so like it's just all these dead bodies from this giant battle.
yes.
So lots of people died who were not even aware of this battle, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't think it means that like the blood from the battles poisoned people living in the cities and they died. I think it's what the imagery here is that the location of the warfare was upon the rivers and watersheds, right? So it brought bitterness to the rivers and watersheds, just like the previous trumpets brought fire and destruction to the trees, the grass, the lands. The second one brought a third of the seas with blood and destruction. This one brought bitterness to the rivers and tributaries, and these where all these major battles took place. So God was simply laying out in prophetic language where these trumpets would be poured out to prove through history that he called the shots before they happened and that he's the ruler of the universe. He's on in the throne, he's in charge and he's reigning from heaven.
Doesn't it say in Revelation that the wormwood, the waters, when he got sick, or no? I don't
Um
remember the passage there.
let's go back here and it was Revelation 8. Okay, let me just go.
Go back 30 pages, please.
Yes.
Or you just open up the Bible. But that was the third.
Uh
Attila was the.
yes. A third of the waters turned bitter like wormwood
Many people
oil,
did die.
and many people died from the bitter waters. Now, again, um,
What does it mean?
yeah, well, it
Oh, I'm,
again,
my mic
it's
fell over here.
yeah,
Was
it's
I hard to hear for a minute?
no, you're good. It's
Okay.
symbolism. Um, a third of the trees and all the green grass. If you're looking at grass referring to people and trees being uh, uh, armies or empires, and the earth showing where it's happening and that it's affecting people. And here, the second trumpet has shown a third of the sea turned to blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, a third of the ships were destroyed. Now, the living creatures in the sea, does that mean fish? No. It means people died. A third of the like naval forces of people died. It's just showing where. It's giving a symbolism of where and who and what, not a literal explanation that, oh yeah, the seas turned to blood and so fish couldn't breathe, so they died, right? And so the same thing with the third angel, the third trumpet, a third of the waters turned bitter. Well, it's talking about where this took place on a third of the rivers and springs of the water turning bitter. Remember, bitter is a symbolism for warfare, like God poured out. I believe it was on the Babylonians that we saw that scripture. And many people died from the bitter waters. Did they die from bitter water, or did they die from the punishment of the bitter water, which is
Sounds like it could be both. Even like Attila being this great star. Well, there also was a great star as well. Like that's Haley's, not Haley's, but Halley's comet.
yeah. I think that there's some poetic uh, justice in the fact that Attila died choking on his own blood, and that these men drank waters full of blood. I think that there's something that there's a star, there's a Halley's comet that actually appeared. I think that's icing on the cake,
Yeah,
but
icing
not
on
the
cake.
cake. You know what I'm saying?
Sometimes the icing's better than the cake, man.
True. It's sweet.
Should
So
we stop there? The third trumpet for tonight.
yes, we'll
Then
stop there, and then we can pick up with the fourth trumpet next time. So again, here's this picture, a third of the seas, right? So here you have Sicily right here, which is with the extent of the Vandals, right? So here's a third, here's another third, and here's another third. So yeah, a third of the seas were affected, right? Then you have the barbarian invasions coming all through here, affecting a third of the empire, right? We're not talking about these areas. Now, the Vandals did come around through here and conquer this, but they're primarily in the seas, the naval warfare on the coast here. Um, and then the Huns
so,
coming in
so
through the
not much
tributaries.
has happened to Constantinople at this point.
No, very little because I mean, even if you follow the Visigoths here, this red line, they're going to go down here. You're going to touch this area, touch through here, but their main devastation is through here, right?
The
So
Huns did go. Yeah, I
yeah, they
remember that
they touch this
in the
area.
game. Huns go and poke. They did some poking.
They do some poking, but they don't like conquer. I don't, to my knowledge, I don't think that they conquered Constantinople. I think they were repelled. So, this eastern third over here really wasn't
It was more
affected.
of like getting paid. So like they would raid and they would just pay them to go away and then they would go away.
Right. So, yeah,
Just getting some gold.
exactly, get some gold and run away. So you got the Visigoths hitting the lands. Then you've got the Vandals in green here coming down through the coast and hitting the seas. Then you have the Huns in yellow here coming down and affecting the tributaries. And this is where this Po Valley is right here that feeds the major rivers of this entire region. So they affected a third of the rivers and tributaries. And then we'll get, we're going to move on to next time in the fourth trumpet, Odoacer and the Heruli. Now, I wonder if I have this on here. Yeah, we'll have to cover that in more detail
I know
next
what my
time.
homework is.
Yes. And so this will, again, the first four trumpets are connected, and the fourth trumpet is going to end with the overthrow of the Western Third, the Western Roman Empire, and completely demolish it until roughly the year 800, when Charlemagne is crowned emperor by the Pope of the Western Empire. Till that section is revived, it's going to take that long. So another 324 years before you see a resurrection of that that region to that degree. So fascinating times we live in. So good timing on that. And I'll just throw this up here to end on. Good.
There we go.
Thanks, Dr. Klein. I appreciate another episode of Pharisee Heresy. Good times.
Heresy, Pharisee. Take a little Pharisee with your heresy.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, sir.
Good work. Keep up the good work.
You too, brother.
Happy Rosh Hashanah. Trumpets
Happy Rosh
to all
Hashanah.
y'all.
Gonna-
Good 10 days of awe. And Yom Kippur.
Amen to that.